investigated the prison system pretty heavily in Indiana, and that is really interesting. I'm always kind of interested in the prison system. There's a lot of talk now about Kamala Harris and what she was doing in California, and it seems like there's a pipeline to put people into prison for victimless crimes so they could make more people work in these like kind of indentured servitude, slave labor situations where you're getting paid a quarter a day making products for industry. The old trope about stamping license plates. Well, there's a lot of private companies using this labor. And if you're a good little soldier and you increase the amount of people locked up and you help that industry, maybe you get rewarded. Who knows? There's a lot of shady stuff going on in the prison system for sure. Talk to us a little bit about your history investigating that.
Well, it's interesting. When I was a senior in high school, and this was long before the popular Scared Straight programs where they used to take people to jail, the teenagers, whatever. One of a history professor or history teacher in my high school decided that it'd be good for all the senior boys to visit an institution not too far away from us called Pendleton Reformatory. And so they took a busload of us there, and we toured the inside of Pendleton Reformatory and got into the acceptable places. And I still remember to this day walking out of that prison and saying to a classmate, gee, I will never go back in one of those places ever again in my life. Well, I wound up spending more time inside state prisons in Indiana than anybody that wasn't incarcerated or employed by the state to work inside. But that aspect of prison reporting came about because I had written a story when I was a very young reporter about a man who had alcohol abuse problems, and he was arrested for being drunk. He was on abuse. They put him in an isolation cell, and he was ill, and he died in this isolation cell, banging on a little glass window with a tin cup, trying to get attention and trying to get help. And I learned about that from individuals within the jail that I happened to talk to. And I wrote a story about this individual's demise. Well, that story was Xeroxed, and it was handed from people, from person to person, inmates around, because I had written a story that criticized the incarceration system, and it was so unusual for a reporter to write something like that, that it led to me being contacted by an individual who was interested in prison rights and prison reform. He happened to be in prison. He was a con man. His name was James Bell Yeager, and he was quite a theatrical kind of guy, but he led me to question some things about incarceration programs, and that led me to take a look at a complaint that women at the Indiana women's prison were being sexually abused by guards and coerced into these kinds of behaviors. And I started writing, I was writing a column then, and I wrote columns about this situation. And I called out the governor of the state for these things happening on his watch in his prison system, which caused the governor to call the editor of the newspaper and very loudly denounce the work that I was doing, and also to demand that I show up in his office the following Friday to be confronted about this coverage that I was doing. And so I did. I went down to the governor's office, and I had a meeting with the governor in his office, and he demanded a retraction. And he got loud in the conversation. In fact, he was standing up and he was kind of in my face. And he got so loud that the doors burst open to the governor's office, and two state troopers came in with their hands on their pistols, thinking, something was up. But what was up was I was refusing to publish a retraction, and I told him I was just going to keep writing about prisons until we saw some reform, which is what I did for years to come, actually. But in the course of that, I developed sources. I learned some things about developing sources inside state prisons. And eventually, I had such a intense source network that things that were going on, corruption, theft of meat from from the institutions was a big one. Drug trafficking was another on the inside, which was controlled by guards, which was a lucrative situation because a toothpaste cap full of marijuana costs $5 on the inside. So you getting access to those drugs, and there were plenty of them. Was possible, and that kind of corruption filtered down. And so this network of sources produced endless stories about things that were going on. And then, because I was so antagonistic to the Department of Correction, they couldn't ignore me. And they allowed me inside Pendleton Reformatory during a riot situation. And I actually crawled through a cell house filled with smoke, doing interviews with inmates in their cells who were in these horrible conditions. And I was even allowed to go into the recreation area when they let the cell houses off lockdown. And I walked into the recreation yard and sat on bleachers with a bunch of guys. And I turned around and asked them, "How many of you guys are armed?" And they all pulled up their shirts to show me that they're shivs, they're prison knives, And it was a true education. It allowed me to write things that most reporters didn't get to write. The end result of that was that there was a hostage situation on death row at the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City, and the inmates that were holding the hostages would only talk to me. And so I was called in to do negotiations with these inmates to free these guards, and they wanted reporting done about the conditions of confinement on death row. The only way to really attract that attention was with a violent act that they committed. But because of the reporting I'd done, because of the fact that inmates knew me and knew what kind of work I did, they trusted me. And so that opened up opportunities for reporting the kinds of opportunities you don't see. The prison issues are, they were bad then, they're still bad. And now we have private prisons that also use inmate labor to produce goods and services. And people aren't compensated for that work, and that is akin to slavery. And that's a situation that doesn't get reported about very much still to this day.
Yeah, and I'm always fascinated with how interlocking some things tend to be, and there's a lot of talk now about music labels being investors in these private prisons, and then what kind of musical artists do they put out? Rappers who glorify gang activity, drug trafficking, and murder.
Right. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was always looking for fascinating stories, interesting stories that other reporters weren't finding. And you found a lot of really interesting stories in prisons, believe me. All kinds of situations on the human scale of good and bad.
Can you believe it, people? A video clip and a peek into how that sweet THC sausage is made. For some people, I'm sure it's nice to put a face to the name, so I started making clips that are a little more YouTube friendly than the full show tends to be. Get the full show on any podcasting platform. I prefer to keep it audio only, so we have a more decentralized distribution for a controversial show, and also so I can edit out the ums and ahs and barking dogs and all the things that happen when a person records in their home environment. And then if you really like the show, you can sign up for THC Plus, and instead of 1 hour interviews, you get the full 2 hour interview for just $8. I think that's a better deal, more of a win-win than asking you to support the show by booking a therapy session or buying generic Viagra. It's getting weird out there, folks. So just go to the highersidechats.com or click the link at the top of any set of show notes, and all your wildest dreams will come true. All right? All right.